Lord, I thank you that when we look to you, we are looking to a God who is full of compassion and mercy and grace. We're looking to a God who encourages us to call you Father and who treats us as children. We look to a God who has good things to give us. We look to a God who wants to teach us new things. We look to a God who longs to come close and communicate with his people. You aren't far off and distant. You love us and you want to speak to us and show us your ways. Lord, I thank you that we look to a God who we can trust, who is always faithful, who never fails us. Lord, we thank you for your goodness. And as we look to you, Lord, I pray that you would help us to see you more clearly. And as we come to look at your word now, Lord, help us to understand that more clearly. Would you speak to us and show us things in new ways today, God? We thank you that you love to speak to us. We thank you that you love to come close. And I pray that that will be our experience today, God. Amen. Please do take your seats. I don't think I introduced myself at the start of the service, but for those who don't know me, my name is Claire and I'm the minister here. It's a privilege to be the minister here. And it's also my privilege today to be starting our new teaching series on the book of Exodus. Exodus is the second book in the Bible and arguably the most important book in the whole Old Testament. Or if not the most important book, it certainly contains one of the most important or key defining moments in the history of the people of God. The Exodus, which is when God saves his people from slavery in Egypt. Sorry, spoiler alert. Actually, the word Exodus, the book is named after a Greek word, Exodus. Ex means out of, and hodus meaning road. It's the road out of. So this is a story about God's people being led out of one thing into another. And this Exodus event comes to define them as a people, and it comes to define their relationship with God. And time again in the Bible, God himself refers back to the Exodus, saying things like, I am the God who saved you from Egypt. And the Passover, the religious festival that remembers the Exodus event, is the defining festival for the people of God. And in the New Testament, the communion meal that we're going to share later, that Jesus instigates with his followers, is introduced at the Passover meal. Jesus' own death and resurrection takes place during the Passover festival with echoes of the Exodus, God saving his people. There are so many echoes and references to Exodus throughout the whole Bible, and the key character in Exodus too, Moses. Jesus himself is described as a new Moses in the New Testament. Although actually, whilst there's lots we can learn from the character of Moses in this book, he isn't really the main character, because God is. It's here that we find out his true name. It's here that he reveals his true character. It's here that he builds his covenant with his people. God, Yahweh, is revealed in this book of Exodus. I could go on and on about how important this book is, but suffice to say this book is major when it comes to understanding the story of who God is and who we are as his people. And although our lives may look very different to the people who were described in this book, there are common themes that still apply to our lives today: identity, freedom, calling, faith, and faithfulness. So I want to encourage you to get stuck in. We're going to kind of take a whistle-stop tour through this book over the next 12 weeks or so, but I encourage you to read it for yourself, reflect on it, ask questions, listen to podcasts. I'm going to send an email out this week with some different resources that you can get stuck into. So if you're not on the email list and you'd like to be, then fill in a welcome card or speak to me afterwards. If in doubt, go to the Bible Project. They've got loads of great resources. And if you listen to any of their stuff, you'll realise I've taken a lot of what I'm sharing from their stuff because I think it's so brilliant. But today we're going to have a look at chapters 1 and 2, which really helps set the scene for the rest of the book. And there's lots of little hints in these chapters at what has come before in the book of Genesis and what is going to come in the rest of Exodus. So I'm going to invite Nsipa up to come and read for us and try and listen out for those hints as he does. It's quite a long reading and there are some tricky words in it, which is why I've asked someone else to do the reading. So we'll all be patient with Nsipa if, the names get a bit muddled. I'm sure he'll do brilliantly. Thanks.
Thank you. So Exodus, as has been introduced, is the second book in the Bible after Genesis. And so I'll read chapters 1 and 2. It's a long read, but hope you bear with me as I take you through it. Chapter 1 from verse 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all the brothers and all the generations died, but the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Then a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies fight against us and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithon and Rameses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor and brick and mortar and with all the kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard work, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to Hebrew midwives, I'll read that again. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shipra and Puah, "When you help the Hebrew women to childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families and families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave the order to all the people, "Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Chapter 2. Now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could not hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the river bank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then the sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go to get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went to get the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take the baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Verse 11. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them and their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day, he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away. But Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "And where is he?" he asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Bring him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become an alien in a foreign land." During that long period, the king of Egypt died, and the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard the groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Long reading, but I wanted us to hear it all because, like I say, it really sets the context for the rest of this book. So the book of Exodus was originally written in Hebrew, and in Hebrew, the very first word of the book is actually the word "and." And this is a clue that although this is the second book of the Bible, it is very much a continuation of what has gone before. And the author of Exodus traditionally believed, I don't know why it's going backward and forward there. I'll leave it to you, Gareth, to sort out. I don't quite know what's going on there. Traditionally, it's believed that the book was written by Moses, and this author uses the first couple of paragraphs to link us back to what's happened before and explain the current context. Can we get it to work, or is it going to... Yeah, you can keep it on that for me. I don't quite know why it's flicking between them. That's great, thank you. The book opens in Egypt, and why are God's people in Egypt? Well, if you read Genesis chapter 37 onwards, you read about how a man called Jacob, also known as Israel, who was the son of Isaac and Abraham, This guy had 12 sons, and all of them are named in these first few verses. And one of those sons, Joseph, the one with the Technicolor dream coat, he ended up in Egypt as a slave. But eventually, through God's intervention, he became the right-hand man to Pharaoh. He helped prepare the Egyptians for a great famine, and during the famine, his brothers all came to Egypt looking for food. There was a dramatic reunion, and in the end, all of the family came to Egypt. And the 12 sons of Israel all had lots of kids, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel. Collectively, they became the Israelites. Just to say, you'll notice throughout Exodus that sometimes these people are called the Israelites, the descendants of Israel, and sometimes they're called Hebrews, which seems to be a term referring to the descendants of Abraham, but it all means the same people. The two terms are used interchangeably, but we're talking about the same group of people here. And in verse 7 of this passage, we're told that the Israelites continued to grow in number, and there's some quite specific language that comes up there. If you could just flick for me, Gareth, thanks. The author doesn't just say, there was more of them. He uses very specific language that's found in Genesis 1:28. It says they were fruitful, they increased in number, they filled the land. And this is all parts of God's original commission to mankind. And these are all signs of God's blessing on his people. And this also links with another blessing from God, also found in Genesis, this time Genesis chapter 12. And it's given to Abraham, the grandfather of Israel. And here God says, I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. God makes this promise to Abraham, who at this point has no kids and is quite old. But he says you're going to become a great nation, and through your descendants all the nations on the earth will be blessed. And that God will bless those who bless you. And some of that has already happened through Joseph. Joseph was given a position of privilege in Egypt, and through Joseph, the nation of Egypt was blessed as he saved countless people from starvation through his planning for the famine. But there's also a warning here that those who curse or mistreat God's people will receive a curse from God, not a blessing. So whilst things have started off well for the Israelites in Egypt, over time things began to change. And a new king comes to power who doesn't remember Joseph and the blessings that he brought. This king doesn't look on the Israelites as a blessing. Instead, he sees them as a threat. And he says, come, we must deal shrewdly with them. And again, there's a link here to Genesis chapter 3, where the servant is described as crafty. It's the same kind of language. It's also good to remember that when God gave his initial commission to people to multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, they were told to rule over the earth and the animals, but they were not told to rule over each other. God's original intention for mankind is not that anyone should rule over another or oppress them. Only God should have authority and rule, because only he can rule completely, fairly and justly. But this king, this Pharaoh of Egypt, notice he's not named. We'll get to that later on. He's definitely not interested in fairness and justice. Instead, he seeks to oppress the Israelites in 3 ways because he's so concerned about holding on to his own power, he'll do anything to keep it. So his first tactic is forced labour, verses 11 to 14. He works them ruthlessly, makes their lives bitter. But it didn't work. The Israelites continued to multiply and spread because God's blessing is on them. So his second plan is to tell the Hebrew midwives to kill baby boys. And notice we're told the names of 2 of these midwives here, presumably as representatives of a wider group. Shipra and Puah, whose names mean beautiful and splendid. These people are named, these women are named, but the Pharaoh, we're not even going to bother naming him, he's insignificant. These midwives do not bow to the authority of Pharaoh. Instead, we are told they feared God. So they ignored Pharaoh and let the boys live, and they told Pharaoh a lie about what was happening. And God continues to bless the Israelites, and he also blesses these midwives personally too. So then Pharaoh moves on to phase 3. He can't rely on the Hebrews to kill their own babies. I'm not sure why he thought they would anyway. Instead, he tells all the people to throw any Hebrew boy into the water of the Nile. Water is going to be a key theme in Exodus. It's generally as a place of life or death. And here, Pharaoh intends it for death. The Nile is to be used as a place for killing innocent children. And I think it's interesting that later on, when we get to Exodus 7 and we look at the plagues, the first plague that God sends is to Pharaoh and the Egyptians is to turn the Nile into blood, perhaps a reminder for the blood on their hands from this evil scheme. We don't actually know how successful his plan was or how many babies were killed here, but as we head into chapter 2, we do know that at least one baby escapes this plan. So in chapter 2, we're told that a man from the tribe of Levi married and had a son. And then there's this phrase, when she saw that he was a fine child. I mean, doesn't everyone think that their child is a fine child? Even if their baby looks a bit weird, everyone sort of thinks their own children are beautiful. Why would you mention this? Well, actually, in the original Hebrew language, the phrase here is slightly different. It says, she saw that he was good. And this is basically the exact same phrasing you find in Genesis chapter 1 when God is creating the world. God creates the light or the land or the animals, and it says, and he saw that it was good. Pharaoh sees these babies as a threat, and he plans for destruction and death. But this woman sees her baby like God does, and she sees that he is good. So she aligns herself with God's plans for creation and life. So she hides her baby for as long as possible, and when she can't hide him any longer, she makes a basket for him. Except, again, in Hebrew here, the word used isn't actually basket, it's the word tevah. And this word is only found in one other place in the Bible, and there it's translated as ark, as in Noah's ark, as in the vessel that's used to save God's people from the destruction of the waters. So this baby is placed in an ark, a thing of salvation, and later on he is going to be the one that leads people to salvation through the waters. She places the ark in the Nile among the reeds, and this is another hint at what is to come. Because the word, although it's the Nile here, the most common time we see the word reeds, suf, in the Old Testament is when it's talking about the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. So again, he's hearing the reeds. Later on, he'll go through the reeds. And we're also told that the baby's sister stood here to watch to see what would happen. Although she's not named here, it's most likely that this is Miriam, who is named later on in the Exodus story. And she would have been about 6 or 7 at this point. And she's pretty bold, isn't she, for a young girl to approach Pharaoh's daughter when she spots the baby and suggests a nursemaid. We don't know the exact identity of Pharaoh's daughter here, and we're not sure why she's bathing in the Nile rather than nearer the palace. But she saw the baby, and the author makes a point of saying she saw the basket, she saw the baby, and she heard him crying. And at this point, the story could go either way. Is she going to line up with her father, who sees these babies as a threat and wants to destroy them, who no doubt hears the cries of the Hebrews under their harsh labour and feels no compassion? Or, as she sees and hears this Hebrew baby, will she line up with what God does, who at the end of Exodus 2, we're told, sees and hears his people, hears their cry, and is concerned for them, and decides to act on their behalf? We're told here that she felt sorry for him, and it must have been a strong feeling, because instead of killing this baby like she's told to, she decides to keep him. And at Miriam's suggestion, the baby ends up being nursed by his own mother, who gets paid to do it, by the daughter of the very man who wants this baby dead. And then when he's older, he's taken back to Pharaoh's daughter to be raised by him, we assume in the palace. And it's only at this point that we're told the name of the baby, Moses, or Moshe in the original Hebrew. Now, the author here suggests that she names the baby Moses because it sounds like the Hebrew for draw out, because she drew him out of the water. But that is a little puzzling. Why would she give the baby a Hebrew name if she's going to raise him in the Egyptian palace? I mean, it's a good way to rub her dad's face in it, but she's setting Moses up for quite a tough time. And would she even have known enough Hebrew to know that this is what the word meant? Actually, many scholars think that the name Moses has an Egyptian root because it's a common part of many Egyptian names. It means the son of. But in Egyptian, there would usually be another part of the name. So if you look at a list of Egyptian pharaohs, it's quite common to see something like Tutmos or Ukmos, meaning the son of Uk or the son of Tut. But from an Egyptian point of view, Moses is kind of left open. Son of who? Who is he the son of? Who is he? And this is something that Moses himself wrestles with. We're not going to look at the sort of end part of chapter 2 now, although Nasipa did read it for us. I want to sort of set you as homework to go away and read it through and think it through before we look at chapter 3 next week. But we see in chapter 2 that Moses is trying to work out who he is. Whose side is he on? The Hebrews or the Egyptians? He seems to want to protect the Hebrews, so he kills one of the Egyptian slave masters, but then he covers up what he's done to try and avoid getting in trouble with the Egyptians. And the Hebrews themselves don't seem to think that he is one of them. As we continue to read through Exodus, Moses' identity is going to be a big theme. Who is he? Is he really the leader God says he is? Is he the right person for the job? Can he do it? And even more important, who is this God who's calling him to lead? Can he be trusted? But we're going to get to that over the next few weeks. Thinking then about what we've looked at today, what does this introduction to Exodus teach us? It sets the scene, and there's things that we're going to pick up later on. But what are the things that we need to think about today? I think a key thing that is highlighted in these passages is all to do with power. Who has power? Who thinks they have power? And how do they use it? In Egyptian culture, Pharaoh was seen as divine. He was a son of the gods and manifested their power and rule on earth. As the ruler of a great nation or a great empire, the most powerful person in that part of the world, he was used to getting his own way. He will do anything to protect his own power, even murder babies. And yet time and time again, we see in these opening chapters that Pharaoh's plans are thwarted, as the author makes it clear that Pharaoh is not as powerful as he likes to think he is. And there's an irony here in who is doing the thwarting. In chapter 1, Pharaoh decides to have all the Hebrew baby boys killed. It would seem that he's worried that these boys will grow up and become men and become an army who could fight against him. But he says twice in that passage, kill the boys, but let the girls live. And yet, who is it that is causing him so much trouble in these opening chapters? Who is it that is thwarting his plans? It is girls and women. The Hebrew women are so vigorous that they keep having babies despite the slavery. The Hebrew midwives who refuse to follow his plans and lie to him. Moses' mum, who has a baby and hides him. Moses' sister, who protects him and speaks up with such boldness. And Pharaoh's own daughter, who saves a baby, drawing him out of the water, a baby who will later grow into a man who draws the Hebrews out of Egypt through the waters. Pharaoh has decided that killing the boys will solve his problem, but everywhere he turns, women are getting in the way of his plans. Women who at that time would seemingly have very little power in that society, and yet, with the little power they do have, they manage to cause some big upsets here. And really, they wouldn't have known what a big deal their actions would be. Moses' mum saw that her child was good and obviously wanted to protect him, but she had no idea she was protecting the future leader of her people. And Miriam spoke up for her brother, but she had no idea that he would later speak up on behalf of all the people. And Pharaoh's daughter rebelled against her father, refusing to go along with his murderous plans. But she could not have known that the baby she was saving would later lead a rebellion against her father. To all intents and purposes, Pharaoh is the most powerful person in all of Egypt. Who could come up against him? How could anyone stand up against him or defeat him? Well, no human could defeat him, but God will, as we'll see later in the chapters. But in the meantime, each of these women, at great risk to themselves, used the limited power they had to make a big difference. And it made a bigger difference than they could ever imagine. I'm quite sure that many of us will have felt frustrated at times by the limited power we have. And I'm sure many of us will look at people in positions of power in our world, in our country, maybe in your place of work, and despair at the decisions they are making sometimes. And perhaps you have felt powerless to make a difference. But I think there is an encouragement here that we can make a difference. And our small actions, our seemingly small decisions to stand firm, to not give in to power, especially corrupt and unjust power, to do what we know is right, to defend the cause of the powerless, can have a big impact. And we have a biblical mandate to do just that. There are many, many verses that speak to this effect, but one section in Proverbs 31 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." And as we look at the life of Jesus, we see someone who was concerned for the poor and the marginalised. And we see that in him, he modelled completely differently how to handle power. Unlike Pharaoh, who would do anything to hold on to power, Jesus didn't grasp at power. He didn't oppress others into his service. Instead, he came to serve others. He was willing to lay aside his own power and glory for the sake of others. Power can be a dangerous thing, and to quote the Spider-Man films, with great power comes great responsibility. I spent 4 years training at Bristol Baptist College to be a minister, and at the start of every single year, our principal would give exactly the same talk, without fail. And the title of that talk was Money, Sex and Power. And every year he would warn us that those three things, or misusing those three things, are the most common reason that church leaders fall from their positions. And how heartbreaking has it been over recent years, even recent months, recent days, to read story after story of people in positions of power in churches misusing that power to control and manipulate and hurt other people. And what an awful reflection of the Church of Jesus who did the exact opposite of that. I don't think that any of us here have the kind of power that Pharaoh had, and I feel pretty confident that none of us would use any power we have for such terrible purposes. But we all do have power. We all have influence, even in a small way. So how will we use that? To bless or to curse? To bring life or to bring destruction? To gain more for ourselves or protect and help others? We're going to share communion together in a moment, which gives us a great opportunity to reflect on the way that Jesus used his power to serve others. Just to say that communion won't be served up on the balcony, so if you're sat upstairs and you'd like to join us for communion, please do move downstairs as we sing together in a moment. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up, because we're going to sing a song together now called "You Chose the Cross." And I think this song really helps us reflect on the fact that Jesus, who had all the power in the universe and could have used that power in any way he wanted to, chose to go to the cross, chose to offer himself for us, chose to live a life of service, and chose to die for us. It's amazing to be reminded that that is what true power looks like. That's what true love and service looks like. And it helps us reflect on what that means for us and how we might want to live our time. So if you're able, please do stand and sing with us.
Chose the cross with every breath, the perfect life, the perfect